Welcome to the Kennedy Report. I'm Kennedy Hall. Archbishop Vigano has put out a new letter. And in this letter, he is blasting what he's calling the eclipse of the Church of Christ, of the Catholic Church, by what he has labeled the conciliar church. It's not actually his label. It goes back to 1976, at least. And we're going to get to that. But first, we've got to thank our sponsor over at Noble Gold. Thank you for joining me on this short notice. I was just putting the children to bed. They've been dealing with a little cold and flu season thing. And I got them to bed. I was rocking my baby to sleep. And I saw that this article had come out from Bishop Vigano over at LifeSite News. And I thought that we should jump on. But first, we've got to say thank you to our friends over at Noble Gold. Did you know silver prices are low right now because investors are selling their holdings because of a turn down in demand? I actually didn't know that, so thank you for informing me, Noble Gold. Once fears subside, though, we could see a surge in demand for silver as customers and consumers come back. A perfect time to get your silver IRA started. And this month, you'll get an incredible 3-ounce free silver American Virtue coin with a qualified IRA of 20K or higher. You can't go wrong with Noble Gold. Call 1-877-646-5347. That's the team at Noble Gold. 1-877-646-5347. Call that number now to find out more, or visit noblegoldinvestments.com. As you can see here on the screen, they're offering a promotion here for the silver IRA. I tell you what, I am no financial master or financial expert, but I will tell you that I know a little bit about history. And when you learn about history, you learn that in financial calamities, which befall you when you have leaders like Trudeau and Joe Biden, it's good to have something that you actually own and can invest in, something tangible when stuff hits the fan. So put it that way. So thank you to Noble Gold. Go to noblegoldinvestments.com. You can click the links in the description to find out more. Okay. Our friend here in the chat says, de Lubac used the term conciliar church in 1967. I haven't seen that. I'm going to look that up. Thank you for telling me about that. So let's get to the article here from Archbishop Vigano. I'll just share a screen here. So here it is. And greetings from California. Greetings from to California as well. So here is Archbishop Vigano's letter. It's on LifeSite. I'll make that a little bit bigger so everybody can see. So it's called Archbishop Vigano, the post-Vatican II church has almost entirely eclipsed the Church of Christ. Now, there's some imagery in here from La Salette. The church will be in eclipse. That's a whole other conversation for another day. But we're going to read some of it. It's very long. I mean, you can see this. I mean, it's very long. Vigano is definitely one to use his words in a very prolific way. But there are just a few points that I think are most important for us to go over here. He talks about this idea that the church has essentially been eclipsed now. It's possible to speak in metaphor. Obviously, if we believe that the church will not be destroyed in the ultimate sense, the gates of hell will not prevail. We can speak like this. We can say things like, the church has been overrun, or the church is being destroyed, or things like that. But we can say these things while at the same time understand that we're using hyperbole, and that we know that the gates of hell will not prevail ultimately against the church. But you know what? There is no guarantee that it will be a golden age forever. There is no guarantee that it'll be even easy to find the visible church. I mean, we know there will be a visible church, and I guess officially that means as long as we have ordained priests and things like that, we'll have a visible church. But it's anyone's guess about how, obscure things could get with what's been happening. So Archbishop Vigano is sort of exploring those themes in this letter, as far as I can tell. And he goes on to talk about, well, basically, he goes through this part here where Pope Francis is, writing about or speaking about the 60th anniversary of the council. Or of the 60th anniversary of the opening of the council. And he talks about the total self-referentiality of the conciliar church. Okay, and he goes on to say, what is a conciliar church? Well, the conciliar church, make that bigger there. The conciliar church considers itself heir to Vatican II apart from the other 20 ecumenical councils that preceded it over the centuries. That is the main factor of its self-referentiality. It disregards them in the faith, proposing a doctrine contrary to that taught by our Lord, preached by the apostles, and transmitted by the Holy Church. It disregards them in morality, derogating from principles in the name of situational morality. Finally, it disregards them in the liturgy, which, as a prayerful expression of the lex credendi, has wished to adapt itself to the new magisterium and at the same time has lent itself as a most powerful instrument for indoctrinating the faithful. Okay, so let's unpack some of those things here. Okay, so Vigano is talking about this conciliar church. Well, first, our friend in the chat said, thank you, you're welcome, Lester. Our friend in the chat said that he has seen this term all the way back to 1967 with Henri de Lubac. I haven't seen that, but I can tell you where I've seen this term before. And shocker, it goes to Marcel Lefebvre. And I'm actually writing a book on Lefebvre. And maybe I can actually share this so you can actually see what I'm talking about. I guess I won't because I have to share something else. But in any case, it's just a footnote in my book, but I reference something from Michael Davies. And this is where this idea of the conciliar church was used. And this is where the idea of conciliar church was actually used in an official capacity. And it was in a letter from Cardinal Benelli. By the way, I voiced Cardinal Benelli with an Italian accent in Father Murr's book, Murder in the 33rd Degree. But anyway, here's Cardinal Benelli again. And it's in a 1976 letter from Cardinal Benelli. And basically, Lefebvre is warned that his seminarians will not be ordained unless they act, and this is a quote, okay, this is an actual quote, in genuine fidelity to the conciliar church. So Michael Davies went on to, he opined and he said, since the seminarians at Acon, where the seminary was, have already promised their fidelity to the Catholic Church, they cannot transfer it to the conciliar church. And this is in Apologia pro Marcel Lefebvre, volume 1. So this term conciliar church goes back a long way. Okay, thank you. According to Tim Flanders. Okay, Flanders is a friend of mine. I'll ask him about this. De Lubac is quoted in opening pages of Hildebrand's Trojan Horse and City of God. Okay. But in any case, so this idea of conciliar church, it's on the one hand, we can understand how someone might say, hey, I'm part of, I belong to the Church of the Council of Trent. And maybe you could say that in contrast to someone presenting errors that have been condemned by Trent. That's possible. Like, let's give fairness, benefit of the doubt here. If you were alive at the, relatively soon after the Council of Trent, a few hundred years ago, whenever it was, roughly a few hundred years ago, and, there's errors and heresies going around and someone tries to get you on something, you say, hey, buddy, I belong to the Church of the Council of Trent. I don't know what church you belong to. I get it. I understand this idea of using the rhetoric there. But it's another thing to say express your fidelity to the conciliar church, because you could never say something like that officially. You could say, if there was an ecumenical council that was explicitly dogmatic, wherein there was, wherein there were anathemas, canons, that sort of thing that we didn't see with Second Vatican Council. But let's just say there was something that was explicitly dogmatic. Yeah, you could say you won't be ordained unless you profess your fidelity to the teachings of the X, Y, and Z council. That makes sense if what we're talking about is there are things that you have to believe as part of the legitimate magisterial, clear teachings of the church, compared to you must express your fidelity to the quote unquote conciliar church. The conciliar church does not exist officially. And this is what has been so confusing over the years. Good answer here from someone in the chat. This is what has been so confusing over the years is, you know, uh, bishops like Lefebvre and Vigano, and increasingly bishops like even Cardinal Mueller. He's starting to sound pretty hardcore. I did a show a couple days ago on him. I think he said in an interview that you could separate formally from your bishop if he's a heretic. That's how I read it. Maybe I'm wrong, but I read it and I talked to the person who understood it in German, and like I was like, "Whoa, that's actually pretty strong." So Cardinal Muller's kind of, you know, you know, um, shaking things up a little bit. But in any case, you know, a lot of um, a lot of people will get on these hardcore, strong, steadfast bishops and cardinals, and they'll say, "Whoa, whoa, you're kind of going too far," but they're speaking in hyperbole. This is what prophets do. This is what I don't understand why the anti-traditionalists can't understand this. Bishops are apostles. They're successors to the basically the high priests of the church in a sense. And the apostles are like in a sense successors to the prophets insofar as they're these special ministers through this succession. And then part of their role is to be prophetic. And what does it mean to be a prophet? Well, to be a prophet does not just mean to predict the future. Yeah. When we think about Daniel, we talk about his prophecies. So sure, Daniel prophesies the various kingdoms. That's one thing. But it's another thing that's a part of being a prophet is where you speak the hidden truths of God to teach the people. So this is why, you look at the writings of the prophets in the time of the Old Testament, for example, and with St. John the Baptist, who was sort of like the last kind of Old Testament prophet in a sense. And there's some predictions for sure, but what they're doing is they're calling out the sins of the men of the church publicly, often. They're calling out the sins of the men who are in authority. They're calling out the sins of the people. And they're saying things like, woe to all of you. You'll be damned for all eternity if you don't clean your act up. And in those cases, they use a lot of hyperbole and metaphor. I narrated Taylor Marshall's book, Antichrist and Apocalypse. And after reading that, Taylor and I were talking while I was narrating that book. Some of the things that were said by even the minor prophets, it's like, whoa, that is some crazy language taken at face value, but it's accurate when you understood why it's being said. And Marshall did such an amazing job. Some of the things I had to voice, I'm reading these passages from the Old Testament and I'm going, I don't think I can say that out loud, but these are saints. I mean, these are men, picked by God for holy missions in the history of salvation. So when a bishop is speaking in hyperbole, we don't take that necessarily as a statement of juridical fact or as a statement of what that man believes about the official nature of the ecclesial reality of the church. Excuse me. On the other hand, so sorry, when Marcel Lefebvre, Vigano, these men, they're talking about this conciliar church, people throw rocks at them. Oh, how can you say that? There's not such thing as two churches. They never have said so officially. It's all hyperbole. It is all prophetic language, which is becoming of an apostle who is a successor of this Old Testament role of teaching and leading the people. Okay. But on the other hand, we have Cardinal Benelli, who I believe was very conservative, but he wasn't really part of the traditionalist movement per se. Movement, whatever that means. He was, a good bishop, and Cardinal and Father Murr said that he was quite an astounding man, and I believe that. But this was a very confusing time. He was very close friends with Pope Paul VI, and it was sort of in that moment you're going to have to pick a lane. And he wrote down, and he was the Deputy Secretary of State, kind of like third in command of the church, or pretty close to it. And He writes officially, profess, you know, um, fidelity to the conciliar church, not to the teachings of the Second Vatican Council, but to the conciliar church. And this is in an official letter that is sent to Bishop Lefebvre, and and this is something that is, this is a letter from your superiors, stamped it, locked it, can't erase it. This is a real thing, and in this real thing, I'm not just using hyperbole. I'm saying conciliar church. That's pretty crazy. That's a pretty big deal. So when Bishop Vigano here is talking about this conciliar church, he has every right to, in my opinion, because this is not a term that the supposed so-called traditionalists have made up. He goes on to say, the faith of the people has been scientifically corrupted through the adulteration of the Holy Mass carried out through the Novus Ordo, thanks to which the errors contained in nuce, in the texts, and that sort of means in seed form, sort of the time bombs, in the text of Vatican II, took shape in the sacred action and spread like a contagion. Excuse me. But if on the one hand, the quote-unquote conciliar church is keen to reiterate that it wants nothing to do with the old church, and let's just pause there for a second. That's the logical conclusion. If you split things, it's interesting. This is sorry for so many tangents here, but it's making me think of a lot of things. I was looking into doing a master's, and I was looking at different universities, different Catholic universities. There's a few that I think Ave Maria is probably maybe Christendom. They're both pretty traditional. I'd probably be pretty okay with those ones. But I was looking around at all the sort of classic examples, Augustine Institute, Steubenville, Holy Apostles, excuse me, Catholic University of America, the ones that are known for having sort of a conservative, whatever that means, conservative bent. And I was looking through their course syllabi, and one of the schools, at least one of them, the two courses that you had to take to get your master's in theology for church history, you took one course that was pre-Vatican II church history. You took another course, I think this was Steubenville, another course that was post-Vatican II history. So 19 centuries, one course, 50 years, another whole course. That's crazy. And that is the mentality, though. It's as if the Second Vatican Council, it's like we should say, how we have AD and BC, before Christ and Anno Domini. It's like it's almost like a new Anno Domini. I'm saying this metaphorically here. I'm not actually saying that's true. That'd be wrong. But it's that same mentality. It's like 1962, I guess 1965 when it finished. This is like where history starts again. And the church is separated into a before then and an after then. And this is not the traditional position. This is not what the traditional bishops who resisted and withstood, and the traditional priests, this is not their idea. This was what was thrust upon them, and they had to react to it. And this is what Bishop Vigano was talking about here. And he's saying, the conciliar church wants nothing to do with the old church. This is true. Pope Francis has made this very clear. When he said the Novus Ordo is the unique expression of the Roman Rite, that's not true. It can't be true. The Novus Ordo cannot be the unique expression of the Roman Rite. For one, there are other Roman rites. There are other liturgies that are part of the Roman Rite that aren't the traditional Latin Mass, Ambrosian, Dominican, and so forth. So it can't be. But also, it's just not. How can you have the unique expression 50 that's been around for 50 years, which has been part of the devastation and destruction of the church? There's no way that's the unique expression. That's absurd. it's an unsustainable liturgy that no one will go to in 10 to 15 years because they'll all either be dead, or if they have half a brain, they'll be going to the traditional Latin Mass, probably underground. There's no way. Oh, someone said, why did you not mention Christendom? I did mention Christendom. Maybe you just missed it. I said, I think Christendom was one of them. But yeah, I think you're right as well. Christendom, I've heard, is a wonderful college. I think, well, my employer, LifeSite News, we actually do some stuff with Christendom. And yeah, I've heard it's an amazing school. This was just about my general search for schools. Anyway, so let's continue with the article, though. Sorry if I'm coughing so much. It's cold and flu season, and yeah, I got something going on here. So we do our best with what we have. Okay, so he says, declaring both of them distant and unproposable precisely because they're incompatible with the phenomena, with the phantom spirit of the council. That's true too. Try grabbing on to whatever that spirit of the council is. Try actually defining the spirit of Vatican II. You can't. You can't. It's like trying to grab a snake underwater. Continuing. On the other hand, it confesses with impunity the loss of that bond and continuity with the traditio, the tradition, which is a necessary prerequisite willed by Christ himself for the exercise of authority and power over the hierarchy, whose members from the Roman pontiff to the most unknown bishop in partibus are successors of the apostles, and as such must think, speak, and act. This is really, really impressive. I'm really impressed by this, and I'm going to break this down. Actually, I should keep that big for a sec here so everyone can see it. So he says, they confess with impunity the loss of that bond of continuity with the past, essentially, with the tradition, which was willed by Christ himself. Okay, so what is tradition? Oh, wow. Thank you. Thank you. I hope I feel better soon too. And you're a very generous person. God bless you. So what is tradition? So have you guys ever read, maybe you can tell me in the chat if you've read Open Letter to Confused Catholics. So Marcel Lefebvre, an Open Letter to Confused Catholics, he basically just asks this question. I think it's chapter 17. I think it's that one. And he says, what is tradition? Well, he says, tradition is the deposit of faith. And he actually juxtapositions. He doesn't say, he actually says tradition is not just pious traditions or traditions of, customs. So, for example, you have your July 4th traditions. Those are really important. But July 4th traditions are not necessary for the salvation of your soul, although there probably is apple pie in heaven. I'm just saying. And we have other traditions as well. In all countries, I used to live in Italy as a child, and Italy clearly has traditions which are tightly wound up. But even these cultural traditions, as incredible as they can be, don't constitute sacred tradition. That's what we're talking about. And what is sacred tradition? This is what it is, according to Marcel Lefebvre. Sacred tradition, the traditio. We see here that Vigano is talking about the traditio right here. Sacred tradition is the deposit of faith. That's what it is. Now, why is that? Because hear me out here for a second. The Bible is a product of sacred tradition, or it's part of it. The ecclesiological nature of the church is a product of sacred tradition. The liturgical patrimony of the church is encapsulated in sacred tradition, which is given to us in this deposit of faith. This is why we can't dispense with sacred tradition, because we're dispensing with the church if we do so. Because what the church is, in the sense of what is this thing that we call the church, the liturgy, not just in the sense of smells and bells, but the actual orientation of the sacrifice of the Mass, the catechisms, the Didache, which is from the first century during the time of the first apostle. So this is part of this is an example of something from the beginning. We can read in the Bible, and these things are already going on. Remember, when the Bible's being written in the New Testament, the church already exists. These sacred authors, inspired authors, are attesting to things that already exist. Okay, so in doing so, they're saying to us that this reality of the church is already going on before it's even written down. And what's written down is what's already established. You see what I'm saying here? So sacred tradition and the deposit of faith, they're like this. They can't come apart. This is why historically, there's been a term, and actually Father Ripperger has a really good talk on this. They've talked about what are called monuments. Okay. And what a monument is what it sounds like, but there's an actual usage of it in a theological sense. Excuse me. So, we think of a monument, you have your World War II monument or your World War I monument or something. Monuments mean something very precise in the church. It's something that is built to represent what needs to be transmitted to the people for a reason of transmitting the deposit of faith, which is sacred tradition, which is part and parcel of sacred tradition. The liturgy is a monument. So if you think about a monument in a natural sense, so you have your monument to the fallen soldiers of such and such a war in the town square. Well, if somebody goes and destroys those, this is a crime. The only time you could ever do anything to take that monument down or change it is if you were to make it more magnificent. This is the approach that we have to things that are monumental. So in the deposit of faith, we have everything. We have everything that is necessary for the functioning of the church, for the teaching of the church, for the establishment of the church. And this is part and parcel of sacred tradition. And over the centuries, these things are expounded upon and they're refined, but they're never torn down. This is what makes the post-conciliar era so different, is that it's a tearing down of things that have been there and are part of the transmission of the deposit of faith. And that's what Marcel Lefebvre defined tradition as. It's the deposit of faith. So does this mean that you like a certain missal that's been used is part of the deposit of faith? No. You can have your missal from 17 whatever or 19 whatever. But as long as the monument remains, the structure of the liturgy that transmits to you adequately the deposit of the faith, which you learn through the liturgy. And if you've ever switched from Novus Ordo, which I did, a few years ago, you switch from going to Novus Ordo to exclusively going to traditional Latin Mass, you actually change as a Catholic. You completely change. You change your beliefs. You start to believe things in a completely different way. Not that you were necessarily a heretic before, and then you're not after, but your complete orientation. When you're not in tradition, it's like first things are second and second things are first. And when you go to tradition, you go, whoa, it's completely the opposite. But that's demonstrated by the liturgy. The fact that the priest is facing a different way. He's not facing the people. He's facing away from God. Think about the psychology of that and that would do for you over a while. Think about the difference in modesty that is inherent in the old liturgies. There's a reason why it feels natural to veil at an old Mass, but it does not seem natural to veil at a new Mass. And why is that? Because nothing's veiled in the new Mass. It doesn't imbibe in the attendee and the lay faithful a spirit of something sacred and beautiful being covered, because effectively nothing is covered and veiled in the new mass. Everything's in the open. You can see everything. You can hear everything loud and audibly. It's not presented in a mysterious way. It's put down to your level. It's all accessible. It becomes mundane. It loses the sacred character in a sense. So of course, if you imbibe this, then you imbibe a lack of the sacred character. So this is what Bishop Vigano was talking about, with this idea of the traditio, and the new mass paradigm is completely opposed to it. It's just a fact. He continues. He goes, this radical break with the past, evoked in dark shades by the primitive speech of the one who coins neologisms such as, this is good, neologisms basically means new slang and new terms, such as backwardness, and hurl anathemas against grandmother's lace, is obviously not limited to external forms, with all that they are precisely the form of a very precise substance, not tampered with by chance, but extends to the very foundations of the faith and the natural law, reaching us a real subversion of the ecclesiastical institution, such as to contradict the will of the divine founder. So this is exactly what I mean, he says it much better than I do. But this is exactly what I was just explaining, that when you sever yourself from tradition, you sever yourself from a way of being Catholic that was the way forever, generally speaking. That's the easiest way to put it. And when you have this new paradigm, effectively what you have is a new religion. And people will freak out and say, oh, you're saying it's different. I'm not saying it's different, church. I'm just saying effectively, in effect, meaning how does it play out in your experience? It plays out as a different religion. It's just a fact, and everyone who's been to both of them understands this. Okay, let's continue. I'm going to skip this paragraph here. He says, I'm going to skip that too. I read that earlier, but okay. So he goes through all these reasons why, Pope Francis is all about Vatican II and why they have to keep pushing it and crossing tradition and stuff. He says, for this reason, there are no other councils except their Vatican II. Now, this is really important. Now, listen, I am not of the opinion that Vatican II is a completely orthodox council all the way through. I'm not of the opinion. However, I understand how someone can come to that conclusion. I myself was of the opinion that it was possible to come to that conclusion until I read, and I'll share this document actually right here, until I read the following document, and I'll share my screen. And this is a transcription of the Dubia response that was given to Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre. I'm going to make this bigger. Okay. So basically, there's way too much to go into here. Maybe I'll do a whole show on it, but I've done a Control F search here from the term immunity. Okay. So what Marcel Lefebvre did, Archbishop Lefebvre, is he put forth a dubia. And it actually got an answer, unlike one from Cardinal Burke and Brandmuller and stuff. He put forth a dubia about questions about the Second Vatican Council, mostly pertaining, as far as I can tell, to religious liberty. Now, a little primer on religious liberty. It has always been the case, always, no questions asked, that the church has believed, because this is in scripture, that the state has temporal authority and that the church has temporal authority. We see this playing out with Christ and with Pilate. We see this playing out with the dialogue between Pilate and the Sanhedrin, or the high priests, Caiaphas. There's kind of a confusion of authority there in a sense. Who's going to have Christ executed, right? But they both have the authority to make it happen. We see this in Christ talks. He says to Pilate, so if you have any authority, it is from above. We know that St. Paul talks about the emperor being the diakonos, like the minister of justice with the death penalty. Thank you, actually, friend, putting this in here. Honored Lubac use the term post-conciliar church to warn that a different church from that of Jesus Christ. Yeah, that's interesting. Very good. Thank you for letting me know that. But in any case, the state has authority, and I get accused of being a liberal because I like a lot of libertarian stuff. But even the most crazy libertarian would have to believe that the state can step in matters pertaining to religious matters. And here is why. Because the state must step in. Whatever the state is, whether it's a monarchy, whether it's your town council, whatever. If there is an affront against the natural law, such as the security of the person who is innocent and so on and so forth, the state has the right to step in. This is just basic. This is, and I'm speaking here from the most limited government. We're not talking about right-wing corporatism or something. We're talking about the most limited understanding of government and its role. Like basically lawlessness, but just with a head of state. Even if that's the case, it's basically without police force, whatever. It is completely just. And this is baked into the cake of the natural law, that the state can step in for reasons of justice. And religion is a flowering of the virtue of justice. You cannot separate justice and religion. It's impossible, because justice tells us that every man is given what he's due, and therefore God is due worship. Religion and justice, inseparable, cannot be taken apart. This is why we say, if someone, messes up the church, or messes up a ceremony or something that's supposed to be pious and for God, this is an injustice against God. It's an affront against religion. It's an affront against justice. So look at what this Dubia says, the response from and it's a long one, but Control F is important here. Okay. And this is just one selection. Well, I'll do a whole show on this. This is responding to Lefebvre. So they're saying, in the first place, it should be pointed out that the affirmation of the right of religious freedom founded in the dignity of the human person, independently of the truth of the error of the religion in question, does not signify a negation of the fact that the truth and its adherence to good are an integral part of the very dignity of man. That's one of the most meaningless statements that's ever been said. Classic post-Vatican II. It says, in effect, dignitatis, this letter of, or document of Vatican II. In effect, dignitatis humanae 2 does not say that the dignity of the human person consists solely of nature alone, independent of any adherence to the truth and the good. What it affirms there is that the ontological fact that being a person already comports with a dignity which at a civil level requires, among other things, the right to religious freedom as it is understood in Dignitatis Humanae. And here's what he says. Immunitas a coercitioni in societate civili. Immunity from coercion in civil society. That is impossible. That's impossible. It is impossible. It is impossible that a person could be immune from coercion in religious matters in civil society. And I'll explain why. Human sacrifice can be a religious decision. You can be coerced out of human sacrifice because it's an affront against justice, because it's the murdering of a human being. We have, for example, laws in our countries against multiple wives, spouses, polygamy. Okay, there's more in this letter too. I want to find, it's down near the bottom here. Sorry, one second. Anyway. Anyway, it goes on many times in this document to talk about immunity from coercion. I'm just going on the fly here. Okay, this is interesting here. I'm going to share this part too. So this is part of what Vigano is talking about. So there's a statement here that's being responded to, and it says, "From this cannot be concluded that this synod only," and they're talking about the Second Vatican Council, "only admits religious liberty for the advantage of the Catholic Church." Let's pause there for a second. So if there was a way of understanding religious liberty in a proper sense, this would be it. You could, like, liberty is not a bad word. Just like distribution is not a bad word. So, you call yourself a distributist. It's not a bad word. It's a word. Liberty, I mean, there's a true liberty, the freedom to achieve your goals, the freedom to do what you must. That's true liberty. So you could say I'm all about liberty because you're all about the freedom to achieve your goals, because you have duties that you have to render unto God. You have to have liberty to do so. There's nothing wrong with the word liberty. Obviously, it's been co-opted, freedom, equality, and fraternity, liberty, égalité, fraternité, and the French Revolution and all that sort of stuff. There's this idea that liberty just basically means, do whatever you want. That's not the case. In fact, the late scholastics, the Spanish theologians like Suarez and so forth, they would talk about liberty a lot. And I believe St. Ignatius of Loyola encouraged his priests to preach about liberty more, meaning the true sense of liberty, because people were worried about acting of their free will for some reason. Thank you, Forrest Gump. That's a great movie. I mean, is it a good movie? Maybe I haven't seen it in so many years. It's probably something I'd watched that would be so politically or so blasphemous or something. I just haven't seen it in years. I remember it being good when I was younger. But in any case, liberty, properly understood, is a good thing. And this is the Suscipe prayer from St. Ignatius of Loyola. He talks about, we say it after Holy Communion, we give God our liberty. Liberty is something we have naturally. We have freedom naturally in the sense that we can choose between various things, that we have to be free to do so. That's good. That's good. But that does not mean that what this is saying is good. And we'll go back to this for a sec here. And this document says, religious liberty, it cannot be said that religious liberty is for the advantage only of the Catholic Church. Okay, that's heresy. That's insane. The only church that has rights is the Catholic Church, because error has no rights. Everything else is tolerance. So this document, if we continue with it, is saying that there is a freedom that is for not just the church, and it's equating it. It says, in our declaration, it is explicitly stated that the immunity from external coercion is demanded by truth itself, by the human nature itself. It is founded upon the dignity of the human person, made in the image likeness, made by God in his image, and given free will and personal responsibilities. This is an answer to a dubia. You can see it's from the Acta Synodalia Sacrosancti Concilia Ecumenicae Vatican II. This is from official proceedings of the Second Vatican Council being cited here. Anyway, why am I talking about this in relation to what Vigano was saying? I'll stop sharing that. Because Bishop Vigano is saying, and the reason I brought that up is because I understand why people get to the point where they think that the Second Vatican Council documents are relatively orthodox. And they are relatively orthodox more often than not. But when I saw that, answer to the Dubia, the official answer to Marcel Lefebvre about religious liberty, it was clear to me that the church, on an official capacity, was responding with error and saying, this is what the Second Vatican Council teaches. It teaches error. So whether or not you can squint and stand on your head and, spin in a circle and look at the council documents and say, yeah, that's orthodox. It's clear that they contribute to a spirit of error, and that itself is dangerous enough regardless of the letter. So in any case, here's what, quiet part out loud. Exactly, Laura. Yeah, that's right. Vigano says, there are no councils except their Vatican II. So even if you wanted to look at the Second Vatican Council as if it was possible by the letter of the law to not have any problems, which I don't believe is true. But even if you wanted to do that, you still don't have the freedom to do that because there's only their Vatican II. And that's the point. He says, which by the fact of being the only one to which they appeal shows itself at the same time to be extraneous, if not completely opposite in form and content to what all ecumenical councils are, the one voice of the one master of the one shepherd, meaning they express what's in the deposit of faith, which is handed on from Christ through the apostles, and they just make it more clear. Okay. Someone says here, Archbishop Lefebvre said, should the statement regarding religious liberty in its present form come to be solemnly accepted, the veneration that the Catholic Church has always enjoyed? I'm assuming there's going to be another part to that. In any case, he says it is if the voice of their council is not compatible with that of the magisterium that preceded it, right? If public worship cannot express itself in the traditional form because they consider it in contradiction to the new ecclesiology of the new church, right? The rift between before and after exists and is undeniable. And indeed, they are proud of it, presenting themselves as innovators and as something that non est innovandum. And so that people do not see that there is a credible and safe alternative. Everything that represents and recalls the past must be denigrated, ridiculed, trivialized, and finally removed, being the first to apply that cancel culture, that today has been accepted by woke ideology. From this, we can understand the aversion to ancient liturgy, to sound doctrine, to the heroism of holiness, witnessed by works and not enunciated in fatuous, soulless proclamations. Thank you, Bishop Vigano. So this is, there's more that we could go over. Oh, here it is. I'll put this together. So this comment from Lefebvre that somebody put in the comments, should this statement regarding religious liberty in its present form come to be solemnly accepted, the veneration that the Catholic Church has always enjoyed among all men and all nations because of their love for the faith, unfailing to the point of martyrdom, will suffer grave harm. Yeah. A lot of people don't understand, the good Archbishop, one of the reasons why he protested was because they were taking away the rights of Christ the King. And I'm so bad at this. Thank you, Lester. Apparently there's only 2 likes. This is unacceptable. Everyone right now on your phone, on your computer, click the like button. Please click the subscribe button. Thank you for all the donations thus far. Click the notification bell. And in fact, if you click the link, it's not in the description yet. It'll be in there soon. I just didn't have it for the live stream. But you can actually get on our email list. So if you go to thekennedyreport.com, you can actually get subscribed, and you'll get an email when we're putting out pre-recorded videos that have been produced and so on and so forth. And you'll be able to see what's happening before everybody else does, which is pretty cool. So yes, please like and subscribe this video. Thank you, Lester. And lots of people need this info. Well, thank you. Oh, there are 108 likes. Maybe that was just Lester. Maybe you just had to refresh your thing. Sometimes I'll do that too. But thank you, everybody. So like and subscribe this video. Okay. So Bishop Vigano comes out with this scathing attack against this, basically this idea of the conciliar church. There's so much more that we could say. There's so much more that we could say. But for the time being, I think that suffices. I recommend everyone reads that. You can find it at LifeSite News. I think it's the #1 trending article right now. But it's a pretty good article, and it's in my opinion one of, like, Bishop Vigano writes a lot of stuff, and a lot of it is obviously talking about a current event that's kind of happening and is kind of passing, and there's nothing wrong with that. Again, the church has temporal authority. There's nothing wrong with bishops speaking about temporal matters. They should be, especially when they're touched with faith and morals. Excuse me. But this is one of those letters from Vigano, which he must have been cogitating. I think he must have been cogitating on this idea for a while. He's probably reading the Archbishop. He's probably reading Lefebvre. But this idea of this break with tradition as it is understood as the deposit of faith is a very Lefebvrean idea. And Lefebvre was just a classically trained priest and theologian and bishop. So this was just him. He always said, tradidi quo accepit, I think. I passed on what I received. This is St. Paul. We hold fast to tradition. This is all it is. And yes, Paisley says, read. I accuse the council by Archbishop Lefebvre. J'accuse le conseil. That's a good one. Yeah, it's only 77 pages. It's not bad. This is a really good letter by Vigano. Really strong, and it shows just how deep the theological mess is. But it's funny. Some people will say, they'll try to get me to be a sedevacantist because I'll be talking about we'll be talking about these errors in the church, errors in the council, and they say this is impossible, this is impossible. So there was a priest named Father Hess, and I don't agree with every single thing Father Hess ever said. He had some conclusions that I wouldn't have myself, but he was really good at pointing out all the errors in the Second Vatican Council, in the Second Vatican Council era. And thank you. Sorry, I'm getting distracted by these great comments. Every big community on YouTube has a massive interactive live stream. I do want to go live more. I have 5 children. My oldest is 7 years old, full-time job, and a newborn, 3-month-old or whatever. So I go live as much as I can. Sometimes just not possible, but thank you for that. That's wonderful. But in any case, what was I saying? Oh yeah, Father Hess. Father Hess, he would give these talks about the major issues, and people would say, well, hold on, I thought the Holy Ghost protected the church. And he said, the Holy Ghost did protect the church. And they're like, how can you say that after all of these errors are found in the Second Vatican Council paradigm? And I think it's fair to say that there are errors, at least implicit in the texts. And how can you say that the Holy Ghost protected the church? And he said, you're forgetting that the popes made very clear that it was a pastoral council, and in the nota, in whatever document it was, it says no new doctrines were defined. So as confusing as the documents from the council can be, there you go, as confusing as the documents can be, the fact that we know that no new doctrines were defined, which means if it contradicts the old, we can go with that. that it was pastoral and not put forth in the infallible manner with the anathemas and the canons and so forth, and that we know from councils. Doesn't mean it wasn't a real council, but it just wasn't put forth in the same way. This is the Holy Ghost protecting the church, because it's possible for reform after this, and no, impassable lines were crossed. That's how he talked about it, and I think that's actually quite true. And Paisley says here with the quote, "It is because it is in the nature of the church to be a tradition that she has always instinctively had a horror for novelty and change, of mutation under the pretext whatsoever." Yeah, exactly. Anyway, okay, good. So, if there are any questions, I'll stay on for a few more minutes before I sign off here. If you do have a question, there's a lot of comments, so please put a couple of question marks in front of it. Again, we were going over the letter by Archbishop Vigano, and actually our friend KJ Hammer says Lefebvre is the elephant in the room that the traditional Catholics from non-SSPX supporters won't talk about. I would say in some cases, although I would say that it is changing. And I was just down at the Remnant Catholic Identity Conference, and I was there as press for LifeSite, and I brought up a talk or a question about Lefebvre. Just me asking the question as a reporter actually got a round of applause from the whole crowd, 700 people, because they just love to hear Lefebvre's name. And that's, I mean, some of those people there go to the Novus Ordo. There were Novus Ordo priests there, and they were clapping at the name of Lefebvre, which is really cool. And who else was I talking to about it? But anyway, Lefebvre is just, he needs to be talked about more, but I would say amongst traditionalists, but I would say that it's definitely changing. It's definitely changing. I mean, you can't ignore him at this point. Every single thing he said has been proven correct. You know, people ask me why I talk about him all the time. Well, I mean, how can you not? I mean, every single thing that we're going through, if you're looking for the man who has the keys to understand, I mean, it's Archbishop Lefebvre. It's Archbishop Lefebvre. Paul Pereira says, how much longer until there are only TLMs? I bet one of my friends, yeah, I mean, I don't think it's very long. I mean, let's just do a little math here. It's been a long time since I was at the Novus Ordo, but there were families that were open to life. They're the outliers. But they were outliers, but the vast majority contracepted, and that's just, this. And then lots of other ones were old. So the likelihood of families who don't live the faith of transmitting that to their kids, of which they have one or two because they've contracepted, doesn't always happen that way. Sometimes people just don't have a lot of children. I'm not judging. I'm just saying the odds are, out of a whole parish that's consistent, there's going to be contraceptive usage. The odds of passing on the faith are very slim. Maybe habit, but it's not going to stick. And then the elderly population dying off. I mean, the baby boomer generation, the wonderful white-haired ladies who sit in the front of the pews at every mass. I mean, within 10 to 15 years, that generation is going to be largely dying. They're all in their sort of, the low end of it is in sort of the early 60s right now. 15 to 20 years, I don't think there can be much Novus Ordo. I mean, I don't know who's going to go. Increasingly, the families that are young traditional families are attending that, or young Catholic families that are open to life, they're navigating towards the East, so Byzantine and stuff, or traditional Latin communities. So I think that's just the way it is. Okay. Deborah. Wow. Yeah. My generation is no good too. I mean, millennials, boomers, we've all got our problems. What are your thoughts about the stories about online about his father? I don't know what that refers to, but Archbishop Lefebvre's father died fighting the Nazis for France. So he was an absolute hero. Now, there is some controversy about Lefebvre having signed some of the documents. Sorry, there's a question here. Is it true that he was offered one bishop and ignored them since he wanted 4 bishops? It's actually more complicated than that. There was a recommendation that was put out that it was said that he needed a bishop immediately for the reason this was part of a negotiation thing. But then the Vatican had asked for multiple lists of multiple candidates because there was the intention they were going to give multiple candidates. So it's a little more complicated than that. Okay. I think this is all there is for now. Good. We're over an hour now. Any more questions? If you have them, please put them in the chat. If you're just joining us, this is near the end, so you want to go back to the beginning. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel. Thank you for the donations. It's been, wow, the generosity of people is amazing. Oh, okay. So what do we do about the sedevacantism debate? It was way too convincing. So here's what I'll just say. Here's what we'll just say about the sedevacantism thing. There is no definitive church teaching that is binding on any Catholic in the sense of, well, I shouldn't say that. I believe that it is established that it's impossible for the church to be without a pope. I don't know how to express that here. I'm just saying from my reading and from what I've looked at, that's what I think. However, I can't find a council or a canon or whatever that says, if anyone says there is no pope, let them be anathema. It's clear that there have been times in history with confusion about the papacy, but the thesis that is put forth by the sedevacantism movement that we sort of dogmatize this idea that because they've manifested some sort of heresy, that therefore they've lost their office and there is no pope. This is not church teaching. It doesn't mean that it's not possible logically in the minds of some theologians. I'm not saying that, but it is not church teaching. So the sedevacantists are very intelligent and they're very convincing because they have a massive wealth of quotes from saints and popes and things like that in their repertoire. But to dogmatize sedevacantism as if you can establish that there's sort of a Vatican II sect with, it's all anti-church and anti-popes and things like that, and you're certain of it, you can't do that. I'm sorry, you just don't have the authority to do that, and you don't have the wisdom to do that because it's just not what you're given with. Thank you for the nice words there, Paul. Someone in the chat is saying TLM is only 1%. I don't see it taking over. That's because you don't know how to do math like God. Doesn't matter if there's numbers. It's about, and actually, it's not only 1%. That's actually a complete lie. Only 15% of baptized Catholics attend Mass all the time. So if you don't attend Mass, you're not going to Mass. You don't count. Sorry, you just don't. So if 1% of the church are traditional Catholics, are going to traditional Mass, then it's a lot more than 1% of the people going to Mass. Think about it that way. So the math doesn't even work. If 15 to 20% of Catholics are attending Mass, like in Western Europe and North America, but 1% of Catholics go to traditional Mass, then the percentage, the relative influence of the traditional liturgy, the traditional Mass, the relative influence is way above their weight. This is why the hierarchy is going after the traditional Latin Mass. If it was just 1%, they wouldn't care. But it's not. It's a massive percentage of the inertia in the church, and this is why they're going after it. Okay. All right. I think that's all she wrote. Going once, going twice and a half. Any questions before we sign off here? Okay, if you just joined us, we were talking about Archbishop Vigano. Go to the beginning of the video. We went through a lot here. Oh, someone from India. That's so nice. It's early morning here in India, but I would never miss your program for all the world. See, you can tell you're from the Commonwealth when you spell program with an M and an E, 2 M's and an E. God bless you, sir. Or it's Kyria Liaison, so I don't know if it's a guy or girl. You red pill us on so much. You see, we in here in India don't have a trad mass in most of India. Yeah, I've heard that. We got some really good friends from India that are traditional Catholics. Okay. Well, where do we go? Where do we go? We have the full meal deal because we are Catholics. We wait upon him. Yeah, I guess it's more a rhetorical question. Mrs. All right, Mrs. Elazon. Great. Okay. All right, ladies and gentlemen. I think that's all we can do. I got to go to bed. Like this video, subscribe to this channel, click the links in the description. Thank you to my sponsor at Noble Gold and make this possible. Thanks to my team at the Kennedy Report for doing all the production and all that kind of stuff. Click the notification bell, sign up for the emails, which you can see in the description. This has been the Kennedy Report, and until next time, God bless you all.